If they don't eat in the next 48 hours, we'll have to feed them through a tube. Ethan Rivera stood in the nursery doorway, the doctor's words still echoing, watching his newborn twins Noah and Eli writhe in his arms with cries that sounded thinner every day. Their mother, Sabrina, had vanished after the birth, leaving only a note and a silence that felt louder than the screams. Ethan had money connections, the best pediatricians in Sao Paulo, and none of it could make two starving babies except a bottle. Nannies came and went like shadows, each one, confident at first, then broken. Formulas were changed, temperatures tested, bottles swapped. Nothing worked. The twins turned their faces away, as if hunger itself was safer than what the world offered them. Ethan stopped sleeping. He started bargaining with God in the dark, rocking two tiny bodies and whispering, "Please, just a little for Daddy." On the third day of a new housekeeper's shift, the door opened. Imani, a black woman with calm eyes and hands that didn't shake, walked in holding two warmed bottles like they were sacred. "Let me try once, Mr. Rivera. Just once." Ethan didn't argue. Desperation nodded for him. Imani gathered Noah and Eli against her chest, sat in the armchair by the window, and began to sway, slow, steady, like a heartbeat returning. She hummed an old melody under her breath. The room changed. Noah latched first, then Eli. The crying stopped so suddenly Ethan felt the silence punch the air from his lungs. "How did you do that?" he choked. Imani didn't look proud, only tender. Sometimes she said softly, "Babies don't need perfect technique. They need to feel safe and wanted." Later that night, when the house finally fell quiet, and Noah and Eli slept with milk-heavy breaths rising and falling in unison, Ethan sank onto the nursery floor and broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just the kind of silent collapse that comes after weeks of holding yourself together with nothing but fear. He pressed his forehead to the crib rail, his hands still trembling, and for the first time allowed the truth to surface. He had been terrified they would die in his arms. Not someday. Soon. Slowly. Right in front of him. For months, Ethan had told himself he was strong enough. Strong enough to raise them alone. Strong enough to replace what Sabrina had refused to give. He had thrown money at the problem the way he always had elite doctors, imported formulas specialists, who spoke in perfect credentials and empty reassurances. But every failed feeding stripped another layer of confidence away, until all that was left was a man pacing the halls at 3 a.m., whispering apologies to two infants who couldn't understand a word. "I failed you before I even learned how to be your father." That thought had lodged itself deep in his chest, heavy and unmoving. He replayed every argument with Sabrina. Every moment he'd pushed for a family when she clearly didn't want one. Maybe this was his punishment. Maybe love, when forced, always left scars. When the pediatrician mentioned hospitalization tubes, the word critical, something inside Ethan had cracked. He remembered sitting in his car afterward, gripping the steering wheel, unable to turn the key, because driving home felt like driving toward a goodbye he wasn't ready to face. Now, as moonlight spilled softly across the nursery, he looked at his sons alive, fed peaceful, and felt the guilt collide with relief in a way that stole his breath. He hadn't saved them. Love alone hadn't been enough, and admitting that hurt more than he wanted to confess. Ethan wiped his face and stood slowly. Across the room, Imani moved quietly, checking blankets with reverent care, as if she knew how close everything had come to ending. For the first time in weeks, Ethan whispered something different into the silence. "Thank you for staying." Imani had arrived quietly, almost unnoticed. No resume thick with credentials, no confident promises about fixing what experts couldn't. Just a simple uniform, a small cloth bag, and a presence that felt steady. Ethan barely remembered shaking her hand that first morning. His mind had been too crowded with schedules feeding charts and the ticking clock no one else seemed to hear. But Imani noticed everything. She noticed how the house flinched at sound, how every cry echoed a little too long like the walls themselves were exhausted. She noticed how Ethan moved fast, tense, always bracing for the next failure. And most of all, she noticed the twins. Not as a problem to solve, but as two tiny souls asking for something no checklist could provide. When she cleaned, she worked slowly, deliberately. Not because she was careless, but because she was listening. Each cry made her pause, her eyes lifting toward the ceiling as if her heart was answering before her mind could. There was something personal in her concern, something that went deeper than empathy. Ethan felt it, even if he didn't yet understand it. On the second day, she brought a small bundle of dried herbs held gently in her hands, like an offering. "My grandmother used to make calming teas," she said softly, "for babies who cried like the world was too loud." Ethan declined politely, firmly. He trusted doctors, not memories. Imani nodded and didn't insist. But her eyes lingered with a quiet sadness, as if she recognized desperation when she saw it. What Ethan didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that Imani had grown up learning how to stay, how to hold things together when adults fell apart. She had helped raise younger siblings, while her own childhood slipped away unnoticed. She had learned the weight of a crying baby at an age when most girls were worried about school dances and homework. She had learned that sometimes love wasn't loud or impressive. Sometimes it was just showing up again and again. That history lived in her hands. So when Ethan passed her on the stairs that third day, his face hollow with exhaustion, and said, "There's nothing you can do," Imani stood there long after he was gone, breathing slowly, steadying herself, because she knew something he didn't yet understand. Sometimes the ones who save us arrive quietly. The breaking point came just before dawn. Ethan was sitting on the cold nursery floor, one twin in each arm, his back against the wall, his movements mechanical from exhaustion. Noah's cry had faded into a hoarse whimper. Eli barely had the strength to protest anymore. The bottles lay empty on the carpet, rejected again like every other attempt. 48 hours. That was the deadline the doctor had given him. And now only 6 remained. 6. "I'm sorry," Ethan whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm so sorry. I don't know how to save you." That was when the door opened. Imani stood there, not rushing, not apologizing. She held 2 freshly warmed bottles, her posture calm in a room thick with panic. Her eyes met Ethan's, not with doubt, not with fear, but with something firm and grounded. "Please," she said gently. "Let me try. Just once." Ethan didn't argue. He couldn't. Hope had already left him. Desperation had taken its place. He nodded, barely able to lift his head. Imani knelt beside him and took Noah first. Then Eli, cradling them against her chest, as if her body already knew where they belonged. She didn't hurry. She didn't speak. She simply held them there for a moment, long enough for their breathing to slow, long enough for the tension in the room to soften. Then she sat in the armchair by the window and began to sway, back and forth, slow, steady, like a memory the babies recognized but couldn't name. She hummed under her breath, an old, wordless melody worn smooth by time. The sound wrapped around the room, gentle and sure. Noah stirred. His crying paused. He turned his face not away, but toward her. His mouth opened. He latched. Ethan's breath caught. Seconds later, Eli followed. The silence that fell was so complete, it felt unreal. No crying, no panic. Just the soft, rhythmic sound of 2 babies feeding alive. And hungry and safe. Ethan staggered to his feet, one hand braced against the wall. Tears blurred his vision as he watched his sons drink like they had been waiting for this moment all along. How he whispered, "What did you do?" Imani didn't look up. She only smiled softly at the sleeping faces pressed against her heart. "I stayed," she said, "and I loved them without asking anything back." In that moment, Ethan understood. This wasn't a miracle. It was human. Ethan didn't ask his question right away. He stood there for a long time, watching Noah and Eli finish their bottles. Their tiny hands relaxed, their faces softened by something he hadn't seen since the day they were born, peace. When they finally drifted into sleep, against Imani's chest, he felt his knees weaken, as if his body was only now realizing it was allowed to stop fighting. "I've tried everything," he said at last, his voice low and unsteady. "Every technique, every position. I paid people who've been doing this for decades, doctors, nurses, specialists, and none of it worked." He swallowed hard. What did I miss? Imani looked up at him then, not with pride, not with triumph, but with a quiet compassion that made his chest ache. "You didn't miss anything," she said softly. "You did what you knew how to do." She carefully laid the sleeping twins back into their cribs before continuing as if they were listening even in their dreams. "Sometimes babies don't reject milk," she explained. "They reject fear. They feel the tension before they understand the world. They feel when the arms holding them are desperate, shaking, begging." Ethan closed his eyes. Every sleepless night rushed back at once. "They need to feel safe," Imani continued. "Not fixed, not tested. Safe. Like someone will stay even if they cry. Like they don't have to fight to be loved." He sank into the chair across from her, the words cutting deeper than any diagnosis. "So, love wasn't enough?" he asked, almost ashamed. Imani shook her head gently. "Love is enough, but love has to be calm, grounded, present. Babies don't understand sacrifice or effort. They understand energy, touch, breath, heartbeat." She placed a hand over her chest. "When I held them, I wasn't trying to save them. I wasn't proving anything. I was just there." And they felt that. The room grew still. Ethan realized then that every feeding before this had been a battle against time, against guilt, against failure. But in Imani's arms there had been no battle at all. Only permission to rest. For the first time since Sabrina left, Ethan understood something that changed him at the core. Being a father wasn't about replacing what was missing. It was about creating a place where fear didn't have to live. And somehow, without credentials or promises, Imani had done exactly that. The days that followed felt unreal, like the house itself had learned how to breathe again. Ethan canceled the hospital admission first. His hands shook as he made the call, his voice catching when the nurse confirmed it. Then he watched the scale numbers climb slowly at first, then steadily. Noah's cheeks filled out. Eli's cry grew stronger, more insistent, more alive. Each feeding with Imani became a quiet ritual. The same chair by the window, the same gentle sway, the same low humming that seemed to settle not just the babies, but the walls, the air, even Ethan's racing thoughts. He began asking her to stay longer, then earlier, then overnight. Imani rearranged her days without complaint, adjusting her cleaning schedule around the twins' needs, moving through the house with an instinctive rhythm. She knew their different cries, knew which one needed burping, which one needed stillness, which one just needed to be held close, without words. When she arrived each morning, the babies stirred before she even reached the nursery, as if they recognized her presence on some invisible frequency. 2 weeks later, the pediatrician stared at the growth charts in disbelief. "Whatever you're doing," he said, smiling. "Don't change a thing." Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked through the exam room window at Imani, rocking the twins, her head bent close to theirs, whispering something only they could hear. For the first time, he didn't feel embarrassed by the simplicity of it. He felt grateful. At home, nights grew quieter. Not silent, but peaceful. The kind of quiet filled with small sounds, soft breathing fabric, shifting Imani's humming floating down the hallway. Ethan slept more than 2 hours at a time for the first time in months. He started eating real meals again. He laughed once out loud when Noah gripped his finger with unexpected strength. The mansion that once felt like a place of echoing fear became something else entirely, a home, and in the center of it, without ever asking for the role, Imani had become essential not just to the twins' survival, but to the life Ethan was slowly learning how to live again. What saved them, he realized, wasn't medicine. It was consistency, presence, love that showed up every single day and stayed. Ethan didn't notice when gratitude crossed the line into something deeper. It happened quietly, the same way everything real had happened in that house. In the way Imani stayed up through the night when Eli had colic walking the floor without complaint. In the way she celebrated every small milestone, an extra ounce gained a longer stretch of sleep as if it were a miracle meant just for her. And in the way Noah and Eli reached for her before they reached for anyone else. One evening, long after the twins had fallen asleep, Ethan found Imani in the kitchen, rinsing bottles with slow, careful movements. The house was dim, peaceful. For once, no alarms were ringing in his mind. "You love them," he said quietly, not accusing, not testing, just naming what he already knew. Imani froze for a second. Then she nodded, her eyes filling despite her effort to stay composed. "I do," she admitted softly. "I know I shouldn't. I know they're not mine. But I love them like they are." The words settled between them, heavy and honest. Ethan felt something in his chest loosen instead of tighten. "You've done more for them than anyone ever has," he said, "including me." She shook her head. "You never left," she replied. "That matters more than you think." Silence stretched, comfortable, fragile. Ethan realized then that what he felt wasn't rescue or dependence. It wasn't loneliness clinging to the nearest source of light. It was recognition. Of a woman who stayed when others walked away. Of a heart that gave without calculating the cost. "I don't know what we're becoming," Ethan said carefully. "But I know this: my sons are alive because of you. And so am I in ways I didn't expect." Imani met his gaze, searching for fear, finding none. "I'm not here because I was hired," she said. "I'm here because I chose to be." That night nothing dramatic happened. No declarations, no promises. Just two adults sitting in the quiet aftermath of survival, understanding that the strongest bonds don't announce themselves. They grow slowly, truthfully, out of shared responsibility, shared pain, and the courage to stay. The question didn't come as a grand declaration. It came one quiet night, months later, after Noah and Eli had fallen asleep, tangled in blankets, their breathing steady and sure. Ethan and Imani sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around warm mugs, the kind of silence between them that no longer felt fragile. The house, once heavy with fear, now carried the soft weight of belonging. "I've been thinking," Ethan said slowly, carefully, as if every word mattered, "about what family actually means." Imani didn't interrupt. She had learned that some truths needed space. "You didn't give birth to my sons," he continued, his voice steady but emotional. "But you chose them, every day. You stayed when it was exhausting, when it wasn't your responsibility, when there was nothing in it for you." Her eyes filled, but she said nothing. "I don't want them to grow up wondering who their mother is," Ethan said. "I want them to know she's the woman who fed them when they were starving, who held them when they were scared, who loved them when love was the only thing keeping them alive." Imani's breath caught. "Ethan, I never expected." "I know," he said gently. "That's why I'm asking. Not because I need saving, not because I'm grateful, but because I love you, and because this family already exists, we'd just be giving it a name." Tears slipped freely now as Imani covered her mouth, overwhelmed not by the proposal, but by the certainty in his eyes. "Yes," she whispered. But only if we choose each other every day, not out of obligation, out of truth. They married, simply. No spectacle, just witnesses who mattered. Noah and Eli toddled down the aisle in tiny suits, laughing, unaware they were carrying history with every step. And later, when the papers were signed, and Imani's name became legally tied to theirs, she cried harder than she had the day she first held them. Not because she had gained a title, but because love once freely given had finally been returned. That was how their family was born, not from biology, but from choice. Years later, when Ethan was asked how everything had changed, he never talked about money doctors or miracles. He talked about choice. He talked about the night he realized family wasn't something you inherit. It's something you build moment by moment when no one is watching. He talked about how Noah and Eli never once asked why their mother didn't give birth to them, because in their world that question never mattered. They knew only this someone stayed. Imani stayed. She stayed for the hard mornings and the long nights. She stayed when the boys were sick, when they were scared, when they were angry, when they were loud and messy and exhausting. She stayed when parenting stopped being beautiful and became real. And in staying, she taught them something deeper than words ever could, that love is not proven by blood, but by presence. As the boys grew older, Ethan watched them move through the world with a quiet confidence that surprised even their teachers. They were not children afraid of being abandoned. They were children who knew what it felt like to be chosen. Again and again. Every day. One afternoon during the school event, a teacher smiled and said, "You can tell they come from a very loving home." Ethan felt his throat tighten because he knew how close that home had once come to never existing at all. Sometimes late at night, Ethan would pause in the doorway and watch Imani reading to the boys, their heads leaning against her shoulders, their laughter filling the room. And he would think about how easily the world overlooks people like her. How often love arrives in humble forms and is dismissed because it doesn't look impressive enough. This story, he realized, was never about rescue. It was about who stays when it's hardest, who loves without obligation, who shows up without guarantees. Because motherhood isn't defined by giving birth. It's defined by feeding a child when they're starving, holding them when they're breaking, and choosing them every single day without being asked. That is what makes a family, and that is what saved them all. In the end, there was no dramatic twist left, only truth. The mansion that once echoed with hunger and fear now rang with laughter arguments over bedtime stories and the clatter of small shoes racing down the hallway. Noah and Eli grew up knowing one thing with absolute certainty: they were wanted. Not tolerated. Not rescued. Chosen. Ethan often stood at the window in the evenings watching Imani kneel in the garden with the boys, dirt on her hands, patience in her voice teaching them how to plant seeds, and wait. And it struck him how close everything had come to disappearing. If she hadn't walked through that door, if she hadn't dared to pick up 2 starving babies and love them without permission, if she hadn't stayed, she hadn't just saved 2 children, she had saved a broken man. And in doing so, she found the family she had quietly dreamed of her whole life. Love didn't arrive wearing a title. It arrived wearing humility. And it stayed. This story reminds us of something the world often forgets. Family is not built by blood, but by presence. By the people who stay when it's inconvenient. By the ones who love without being required to. By the quiet courage of choosing others again and again. Maybe today you're that child needing someone to stay. Or maybe you're the one who has the chance to be that person for someone else. If this story touched something in you, tell us in the comments. What did it remind you of? And if you believe stories like this matter, like this video, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Because sometimes the greatest miracles don't come from power or wealth. They come from love that refuses to leave.